Welcome everybody to the Shropshire Safeguarding Forum, and this is a Shropshire Partners in Care event with Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin Integrated Care System, Telford and Wrekin Council, Shropshire Council, Telford and Wrekin Safeguarding Partnership and Shropshire Safeguarding Community Partnership. We're recording this session today so that Shropshire Partners in Care members can have some information about recruitment and retention that's really important to our industry, particularly around references and conduct information. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Corinne Pert, who today is representing Better Hiring Institute. And Corinne is going to talk to us about references and the new exciting toolkit around recruitment. So thank you very much, Corinne. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen, and hello, everybody. So like Karen says, I'm here today from the Better Hiring Institute to talk about the importance of sharing effective references and conduct information. So in my role with the Better Hiring Institute, I'm responsible for making sure that we're driving good practice forward, modernising and standardising hiring, not just in the care sector, but across all of the different sectors that are within the UK. So if we move on to my first slide then, I wanted to start my session today with some statistics that I thought you might find useful and interesting, if not a bit scary. So what you can see here is what we call the 5 Vs, which, believe it or not, are 5 things that all start with a V. So the 5 Vs are an output of a survey that we conducted of over 100,000 references. And what you can see here is, like I say, some really interesting statistics. So first up, we've got validation. So there's a number of reasons why a reference might not be acceptable. So this could be providing an inappropriate referee, information not completed, which we know is an issue, or the reference stating the person's unsuitable. So of the 100,000 references that we looked at as part of the survey, 10% of those received were not valid. Next up, we've got value. So this is about references now just providing employment dates rather than any qualitative or conduct information, which we know, and you will hear me speak today, is a big issue. I know you all face it. So of the 100,000 references, 81% of those contain dates only. So only dates, nothing else. So they're not useful in any kind of effective reference or the sharing of conduct information situation. We've got veracity, which that assesses whether a referee agrees with the information submitted by somebody applying for work, such as place of work, position, dates of employment. And now at 31% of those 100,000 references, there were discrepancies against the information provided by the applicant. So next up, we've got verification. 65% of referee information provided by a candidate were not correct. So obviously in your sector, it's best practice to verify, in all sectors really, it's best practice to verify a reference is real and genuine and has come from a legitimate source. And then finally, volume. So we know that there are challenges in the industry regarding how many references are required and how far they should go back. So there's not really much standardization across the industry, even in some sectors. So of that 81% of references that I mentioned were received out of the 100,000, only 61% of those were ever returned. So, you know, we know that this is a big problem. And I'll talk a little bit more shortly about the vision and the reasoning behind creating the Better Hiring Toolkit in Care. But we held workshops with social care employers and others. I'm sure some of you even fed into that. But the resounding feedback from employers was that references, they're just not worth the paper that they're written on. Basically, we heard, what's the point, I guess? And there are so many reasons. We heard about why people are fearful to provide references and why references don't have a use amongst other things. So now I know that you will all know that references have a fundamentally important part to play in the recruitment of those who are safe, appropriate, skilled and motivated, but they do need to be better quality. And that was part of our vision, which, like I say, I'll come to shortly. How do we readdress the quality of the references as well as give care employers lots of tools and techniques that we can use? And then in the launch of the event for the toolkit, which I know that Karen, you were definitely there, and I'm sure a few others were. We asked over 300 organisations, what's the most time-consuming part of the hiring process? And 63% overwhelmingly said references. So that's almost 2/3 of people saying references is the most time-consuming. 25% said criminal record checks, and 9% said getting information from candidates. So references really taking the lead there in terms of the time it takes for you as employers to obtain, which is, of course, a problem across the care landscape. The focus should be on safeguarding, and it's about making it as difficult as possible for abusers to abuse and to maximise the opportunity to protect children and adults at risk. So an effective, safe and fair recruitment process should include a range of robust vetting checks, which includes values-based recruitment, criminal record self-declarations, DBS checks, and importantly, detailed references at appropriate stages. So that just ensures that as much relevant information as possible is gathered about the conduct and suitability from as many sources as possible about that prospective person that's going to be working within your organisation. And that will make it the fastest, fairest, safest recruitment decision that you can make. So just a little example, something that we talked about as project partners, references are likely to contain information that might not be received by completing a criminal record check, and vice versa. So it's good practice to make sure a referee is aware that they might be failing in their duty of care to an applicant and or the prospective employer by failing to give a reference. They have a responsibility to make sure that any reference provided is accurate, dependable, and does not contain any material misstatement or omission. If they're not satisfied the person is suitable to work with adults at risk and or children, they should provide specific details of their concerns. And relevant factual content of the reference might be discussed with the applicant unless it's a confidential reference, in which case it wouldn't be shared but could be subject to a disclosure in an employment tribunal or county court claim. And you might even get a letter from a legal representation organisation. So I mentioned values-based recruitment. So what is that? It supports organisations to gather information about values, behaviours and the attitudes of potential employees so that you guys as employers can assess whether they will be suitable to work for your organisation. It can be compared to information gathered in references and other vetting checks, which helps make sure employers have a full picture of a person's character before employing them. And then I wanted to cover a little bit about what does an effective reference include. So in addition to verifying standard employment information, such as the referee's relationship with the person applying for a role within your organisation, where they've been employed, volunteered or studied, the dates of employment, the position held, confirmation of salary, number of sick days or absence, reason for leaving. It also, an effective reference for roles within social care should also detail evidence of conduct for any previous employment involving children or vulnerable adults. So that's a little bit about kind of the 5 V's, the 100,000 references. I wanted to move on now onto the next slide, which is where I'll talk about our PRISM model of safer employment. So as part of the project, we developed a framework that encompasses a 360-degree approach to safeguarding in employment. So this is an actual framework, this guidance. It will help you to embed a safeguarding mindset at every stage of the employment journey. And to be able to move beyond that tick box approach, that compliance approach, to a culture of curiosity. So it's really helpful in doing that. And I think over the next few months and in the next few years, as Karen mentioned about embedding the toolkit, I'm hoping that you will all hear more about PRISM as we start to embed it. And for me, this is what really nails it. I think the approach is absolutely inspired. It really helps you to remember about good practice in terms of safeguarding, recruitment and employment. So that 360-degree approach is introduced in the toolkit through this PRISM model of safer employment. And then for the different points of the PRISM model, it's about, like I say, shifting that culture and mindset, which I think is really powerful about the toolkit, moving from compliance and meeting minimum standards to being curious and actively exploring risk and planning further. And what this will mean is it will result in organisations being able to better embrace a safeguarding responsibility and help protect children and adults at risk. And it goes without saying, the more this is used across the safeguarding landscape, the greater the safeguarding benefit will be, not just for your organisation, but for organisations, and more importantly, to the children and adults that we're trying to protect. So moving on now to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we created the toolkit. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to share a bit about why the partners who included Skills for Care, DBS, Reed Screening, Dominic Headley and Associates and BBA Consulting joined forces with the Better Hiring Institute to create the toolkit. So our journey began really across all of the partners, to be honest, with a collaboration from the Better Hiring Institute. It started as a Skills for Care project, and we really kind of ran with it. So at the very coalface, we were all experiencing firsthand the emerging challenges and trends that were being faced by employers when it came to vetting, onboarding, hiring, and that included fraudulent behaviour. So we also know from the DBS conference that was held back in 2020, seems like such a long time ago now, that delegates were really keen to find solutions to the challenges they were facing in sharing those conduct concerns with appropriate organisations. We were hearing that gathering references and sharing concerns effectively was repeatedly raised as a huge challenge for employers. So it really made complete sense for us all to come together as a group and collaborate on the project. So knowing that robust pre-employment onboarding vetting is the first opportunity to deter unsuitable individuals from working in the sector, we were hearing also from employers that references were time consuming to obtain. There's a theme here, isn't there? And actually, once they were received, often they're not worth the paper they're written on. And part of the impact or the knock-on effect of receiving these references that contain very little information, it led to an over-reliance on criminal record checks by employers. And it's a really important point because many people who abuse in trust don't actually have criminal records. So we know that effective references are hugely important, not only as part of an organisation's safeguarding culture, but we also need to think about the wider duty and responsibility to protect vulnerable people supported across the sector. So following those wide consultations across various sectors, actually it wasn't just care, like I mentioned, we consulted with health, education, children's services. We developed our vision for the toolkit, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the toolkit was created to just really drive towards one unified view of hiring best practice across the UK. So the better that we can align and improve requirements and hiring practices, the easier it then becomes to continue to modernise and develop. We don't see the toolkits as one-time only documents, all of them, more on that later, including the care toolkit will continuously be updated. And we talk to our subcommittees and members all the time about how we continue to build on the toolkits. The themes include things like vetting and checking of work seekers, managing supply chains, things like barring information, what to do with that, but also reporting to authorities. For example, should a supply chain misbehave or there's a bad actor in the process. So that was a little bit about kind of like why we came together. If we move on to the next slide, then I'll talk a little bit about our vision. So we came together as partners to try and address the issues we'd uncovered in a way that would have a really big impact on the sector, and to deliver into organisations solutions around how to make sure those they bring in have the right values, the right attitudes, are actually who they say they are in every sense of the word. Because we know that when we get the very best people, we're able to deliver the very best services, the very best care as well. So it felt like a gap in what we had out there. So we came together to create our vision of what it might look like, and what you can actually see on this slide in front of you. The image is literally our image board. So when we all got together, we said, what is it we want to create? What is it that will be meaningful and useful? And one of the things that we know is that organisations like yourselves, it's difficult. You can be time poor. We know the pressures are great. Obviously, at the moment, it's very difficult to source and recruit. So one of our key drivers of the vision is how could we create a toolkit that was really practical? We didn't have to read and try and make sense of. It gives you everything you needed to give that guidance and support. So you didn't have to look for it yourself. It enables you to provide useful references and develop the references that you give if you need to. The idea behind it was that you should be able to pick up the toolkit, and all you have to do is think about, how do I tweak this? How do I make it fit my particular organization? We also heard from lots of organizations that the people we encountered were perhaps some of those people who were already converted to feeling and thinking the same way that we were. So it's a group of people who were incredibly passionate about saying it's not good enough to just fill an empty chair with anybody. It has to be the right person and not baseline. These people have to be safe. They have to make sure that those they provide support to are safe when they're in their care. But some other people we met were having challenges communicating that back into their organizations. So if they were a certain level within their organization, trying to communicate up to somebody more senior where the pressure was on the speed of recruitment and then was taking too long to fill those empty chairs, it was a real problem. So one of the things we also had for our vision was to make sure that we were able to communicate the benefits that people would get from these sorts of referencing approaches. So you're able to sell that into your organization, and that's what you'll also find in the toolkit. We wanted to enable people to provide higher quality references and evidence of conduct, and that is really the backbone of it. It's about safeguarding, and unashamedly, we tell you all the way through the toolkit that references are a part of your safeguarding commitment. So not only to your own organisation and the people you provide care to, but also across the whole sector. Because when a problem moves from your organisation, the chances are it's being moved to another one. And I think the last thing is one of the things that we heard time and time again from people in different organisations and sectors is the fear they had in the myth that had built up about what you could or couldn't share. And you only have to look at some really high profile media stories about what happens when people don't know whether they should or can share information and respond to information to see what issues can arise. And therefore what happens is people don't share out of fear, and then individuals are able to continue with certain behaviours, moving through organisations, moving through sectors. And what we wanted to do was dispel those myths and say, okay, let's tell you what the Data Protection Act really says. Let's look at UK GDPR, what that says. Let's look at what the DBS say. And just as a side note, DBS do want to hear from you, and we tell you how you can provide that information in the toolkit. So through the range of loads of organisations and experts, we've done all the reading. We've made sure everything that we tell you is sound. We dispel those myths. We empower you to not only request the information that you need from other employers, but also to provide those references and share that information as part of your safeguarding commitment. So that was our vision of what we hoped. And then our challenge was to put that together into a format that would be usable and accessible. And I just want to say that it's been a true privilege for me to work alongside all the other project partners to give the toolkit, to bring it to you here now. And I think the timing is absolutely right for a toolkit such as this. So if I give you now on the next slide just a little bit of an overview, I'll talk briefly through some of the main chapters within the toolkit. So as I've mentioned, our vision or our task was to hold those free consultation workshops, individual meetings with stakeholders from many sectors, as well as social care. We wanted to be able to answer every point and deliver everything we outlined in that vision. And I hope you'll be the judge of that we absolutely nailed it. We wanted to make the toolkit that worked for the time poor employer, but also meant you had the information available to you as an organisation. So everything you needed was no more than one click away. Handy tip here, if you look at the toolkit, we made the toolkit sections colour coded. So you can utilise the toolkit as you need or as you want. So the first chapter that we created was around why we need to get it right. So within that chapter, we outlined safeguarding expectations, and we've included a hard-hitting case study, which I won't go through now because I want you to read that information. I want you to sit and really take that in, but it really does set the scene for why we had to create it. Within that, we also include information about the framework we've created, the PRISM model of safer employment. So that sets out the change. The next chapter that was really, really important was, because I think one of the things when we did the consultation, the first thing that people said to us one of the major things that people asked for was there to be a legal lever that compelled and guided employers within the social care sector as to what they should be doing in terms of gathering and sharing information. But when we went through that journey and when we read the information, when we looked at it, within social care, it already exists. The legislation is in place, Regulation 19, that is. And that effectively sets out the standards of the information that we should be gathering and sharing around applicants in social care. So it's important to outline that these regulations also cover individuals being recruited into health roles, so NHS trusts. So the legal landscape was already there. So what we've done is we've broken it down to make sure we've included that right up front and centre so that you're aware of not just your legal responsibilities, but your safeguarding responsibilities as well. Data protection, this is a massive one. Organisations, like I've said, have been fearful about what they can share, how they can share, even if they can share. So we include, again, right up front and centre in Chapter 3 within legal responsibilities. Also your data protection considerations. So what's the legal basis we're utilising in order to gather information or to share information? So we've included not just useful information in there, but we've included links to the ICO's guidance as well. So they've got a really helpful tool called the Lawful Basis Calculator, and we've linked to that. So you can, if you need, utilise that tool to work out what legal basis that you're sharing information on. Really importantly, it's been really clear, we consulted with the ICO as part of the project that UK GDPR is not, I repeat, is not a barrier to gathering or sharing safeguarding related concerns or information. So those are the legal bits. The next chapter we wanted to include was how do we actually gather references and conduct information? And really importantly, we thought we're not just going to give you tips on how to do it, but we're also going to include some templates. We're going to include a checklist. So we've got a range of checklists within that chapter and the following chapters actually, covering the whole process from planning and recruitment and vetting, doing your criminal record checks, your right to work checks, induction, probation, supervision, there's loads. We've included a full checklist, so I'd really urge you to look at it because it really helps to make it a lot easier for you to navigate. We've included information on application forms and the importance of application forms. So we've got an example application form within the toolkit that's free to download, or they're all free to download. And we've got checklists as well. So we've really tried to make everything as easy as possible. We've also then got a chapter on what to do with the information that you receive. It's really important that we're actually probing that information, which we've already heard is very important and can help you in making that decision, and verifying those references, looking at gaps in employment and how to deal with discrepancies or negative references that we might receive. What do you do if it's been impossible to gather a reference? Can you still make a recruitment decision? What do you have in place to make that recruitment decision confidently? So we've also included a pre-employment risk assessment template that covers not just references, but also criminal record checks as well, that we think you'll find really, really useful and helpful. I hope you do. And finally, the main final chapter that we've got is how to share relevant information with others. So it's not just about what we do within our house, it's really important to protect the wider safeguarding community as well. And if we have information that somebody might pose a risk to children or vulnerable adults, it's really important to have the confident tools to share that information effectively. Lots of the heavy lifting that we've done as well is through the FAQ section. And I think we've answered nearly every question that came out through the consultation. There were quite a few. And this document, the toolkit, it will progress and it will develop as more and more comes through, more queries come through, and we start to really understand which bits are useful. Are there any bits missing? So if we just move on to the next slide, then I wanted to talk about the safeguarding mindset. So this is about ensuring those within our organisations and also across the whole sector are safe, and we can make a really positive contribution to that. And actually what we do within the toolkit is get you to think a little bit about how do I provide that information to other employers to do all I can to enable them to ensure that those they provide services to are safe. And also within our own organisation as well, how do I request references and how do I gather that information? So it's really important to talk about this and understanding that Unfortunately, bad things can go wrong, bad things can happen. People might be able to get through certain stages. If we apply a tick box approach, saying they put no criminal record, no negative information's been shared, they haven't said they've done anything wrong, but that in itself doesn't mean that person might not pose a risk to children or vulnerable adults. So what we've really asked you to do, encouraged you to do, is not take the compliance approach to recruitment, which is, I've got my reference, I've done my DBS, both come back clear with no information, tick. Actually, to develop that culture of curiosity, let's gather the right information, let's record information correctly, and let's share it when we need to. So moving on to the next slide then, why is the toolkit important? So it's really important because it's underpinned by the notion of the safeguarding mindset. I know that I keep talking about safeguarding mindset, but it's so important. And it unravels the difference between that compliance and curiosity that I've talked about, and introduces that 360-degree approach. So what's really important about that is that it enables employers to, like you guys, to do your jobs effectively and efficiently. And it's why one of the reasons why the DBS as a safeguarding organisation was so involved in the project and really why they were, invested in it. And we know that the toolkit's already helping many organisations. We've received some fantastic feedback. And when I sent the PDF version of these slides to Karen, it was over 3,500 downloads. That's creeping up every single day. So that's amazing. So just moving on then now into the safeguarding landscape. In terms of the safeguarding landscape then, an employer whose service interfaces with the public has a safeguarding responsibility, which I know you all know. And this requires you to keep aware and engaged with developments in the wider safeguarding landscape. So there's also a requirement for recruiters to have an eye on the horizon. So if you outsource, make sure that the people you outsource to are aware of it. They're using the same practices that you are, being aware of the risks and concerns as they approach and as they develop. So that's something we're all familiar with, but it's really important as part of the safeguarding mindset. So the toolkit really helps employers react appropriately and proportionately, and emphasises the need to ensure there isn't an over-reliance on any one service. So I mentioned already about the over-reliance on DBS checks, or CRB checks as they were. Bishard mentioned this when they were still CRB checks, and that it's about not placing a disproportionate amount of reliance on a disclosure check. So the call for adopting a 360-degree approach embedded within the toolkit supports employers to make the best use of induction, probationary periods, and effective supervision as part of an ongoing culture of safeguarding and vigilance. It's about getting that really embedded as part of the safeguarding mindset, and it will help to identify for all staff or volunteers any behaviours or attitudes which might cause concern throughout employment. And it's really important to stress as well, so it's not just at the point of recruitment, it's throughout the whole employment life cycle. So employers who put in place an efficient system of managing and recording safeguarding related conduct concerns will benefit, should it come to a time when that information is required to be shared with organisations like the DBS or others. So if you make a barring referral, for example, and the decision making and the time in which they make it and the accuracy in which they make it depends on the information received. So if you've been keeping all of that, you've been recording all of it, it will really stand you in good stead should there come a time when you need to make a barring referral or share information. And the toolkit actually gives you detailed guidance regarding when, why, and what to share with organisations such as the DBS. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about on this slide. And then moving on, I wanted to just introduce the Better Hiring Institute because I realise not everybody is aware. So anyone who's unaware of the Better Hiring Institute, we call it the BHI for short, which is much easier. I thought I'd pop some information in here. So we were delighted to launch the Better Hiring Toolkit in the care sector. People have often talked over the last few years about a future of work, but we've long argued the future of work is nothing without a future of hiring. And that's really what the BHI is here to do. work with government and industry to usher in that future hiring. And it really takes the best of digital transformation and modern practices to speed up the hiring process, but more on that shortly. In many cases, we still see that hiring's slow, complex, siloed across different industries, and there's never really been a strategic view of UK hiring. So looking across the whole piece, and again, that's something BHI have been working on. So we work with over 5,000 fantastic employers to help influence change, put together evidential cases for government, and bring about change, just like the digital right to work scheme. We were quoted alongside ministers on the launch last January. So really a bit more now about who the BHI are, the work we do, and how it benefits all of you here today. So BHI is a social enterprise set up by UK government and industry, and it's about, as I mentioned, driving and realising that future of hiring, really driving the need to get people into work quickly, which I know is a problem that is faced within your sector, but also making sure that's done safely. A lot of what we talk about balances the need for speed with the need to also ensure that hiring is safe, particularly with our new digital world. We've got one core mission, and that is to make hiring in the UK faster, fairer and safer. We believe that UK hiring is inefficient. We want to really look at addressing that. We also believe it's highly unfair, and there's lots of barriers that need removing, from things like job transparency to people with particular diverse needs. And we also believe that the new digital world's creating that new safeguarding challenges. So people changing their identities, to deep fakes, to other sorts of digital threats that are happening all around us. So as part of making hiring faster and fairer, it's also really important to us that we hardwire safeguarding within the new world of hiring. We've got an amazing advisory board, which is made up of experts across government and industry. We've got organisations on the advisory board such as the NHS, the DBS, DCMS, which is now DSIT, can't keep up with the government changes, CIFAS, the Federation of Small Businesses, and a few others as well. So they sit on the advisory board and they help advise in terms of strategic direction. We've then got expert panels. So believe it or believe it not, we have one on fairer, one on faster, and one on safer, which are made up of industry experts who look through their particular lens at every project that we embark on to ensure it's making hiring faster, or it's making it safer, or it's making it fairer. And then we have our industry subcommittees, including health and social care. We've got a subcommittee there, of which I know a couple of you are members already, and they're made up of experts in hiring and talent acquisition across those particular sectors to help and advise on things like the better hiring toolkits for that particular industry. So that's a little bit about who the BHI are. Let's have a look at what the Better Hiring Institute do. So we've imagined, like I say, this new future world of hiring, and it's called our Blueprint for Better Hiring, which was published last year as the UK's first guide on the entire hiring process and how it needs modernising. So the blueprint's constantly being updated, and it's really about the future hiring state that we as the UK want to reach. We held 2 parliamentary briefing sessions last year, with the latter being in November, which was attended by employers that represented just over 1 million workers, specifically on the new digital right to work scheme and what reforms needed to make it a more complete scheme. We met with Lord Murray, who is the Minister of State, before Christmas to provide the findings and the evidence and proposals for changing certain things within the right to work scheme were accepted, and currently officials they're working on developing and evolving the current scheme. So that's just one example that I'll call out there, working across a number of areas around all sorts of items to do with hiring. We also do all sorts of work on things like, credit checks or supply chain inefficiencies, or indeed right to work. So we created and commenced the Better Hiring Toolkit series last year. So the Care Toolkit's not our first one. The first one we launched was a local authorities toolkit earlier in 2022. But the big picture this year is that we aim to launch around 8 better hiring toolkits across the 8 largest sectors, covering 80% of the workforce. So what that means is that for over 80% of the workforce, we should have streamlined, aligned and developed the hiring process and best practices. So for the first time, hopefully there'll be a really strategic view across the UK, across industry, looking at hiring processes. And that doesn't mean to say that all industries hire the same way. Certainly there are a lot of synergies, but in aligning and finding those synergies, that better enables us to then digitize or modernize the various components of hiring. So as I've mentioned, that the toolkits aren't something that we see as being a one-time only job. They will continue to evolve and develop. And strategically, the aim this year is that there'll be toolkits representing 80% of the UK workforce. And then what we'll do is we'll use that platform to continuously push for the developments and improvements and modernisation that we know that industry are calling for from regulators, but also from government. We created the UK's first right to work hub with a frequently asked questions that was developed from over 1,000 employers around the transition for digital right to work. That's free, it's available on the website for all employers. And then within the website, there's also things like managing supply chain guidance, again, free best practice for employers who are managing or selecting supply chains. So there should be really interesting and useful information for you on that managing supply chain section. But also within that, we've got where to refer information when it goes wrong, which is often something that is underreported. We also developed adjusted hiring checks last year for Ukrainian work seekers. So where checks like referencing might not be possible in a war-torn country, we developed different ways that employers can meet requirements. So that's just some of the work that we do. Let's move on to what's yet to come. So we are very, very excited to have submitted a 10-point plan for speeding up hiring to UK government. So we have a friendly patron within the House of Lords who's helped with the right to work piece. And he met with the Chancellor and ourselves before Christmas. And the Chancellor's expressed a great interest in how we can get people back into work as quickly as possible. So working with various different government departments, we've developed a 10-point plan on tangible, achievable tasks and asks and aims to make the hiring process as efficient, quick and fair for all. We're also working on a fairer 10-point plan and are about to submit a 10-point plan for reducing barriers in hiring. So that the reduction of barriers can be people who might have caring responsibilities, for example, and those will be submitted to the Chancellor also. We're currently working with the framework providers in the health sector to align frameworks, various frameworks. So supply chains supplying into those industries have challenges around complexity, bureaucracy, red tape. And we've seen instances where interpretations of frameworks mean that a worker might be compliant on day one or one day in one company, but not the second day in the next. So we're working to create industry views to align hiring requirements across sectors. We're also working with government to help improve the transition, like I mentioned, about full digital hiring. So in February, we co-chaired a day with DCIT, as I mentioned, they used to be DCMS, to explore how we can really digitize the employment process. You know, how can we build on digital identity and right to work to help drive the movement of people into jobs as seamlessly and as quickly as possible. But also one of the really big discussion points was about those barriers that organisations face with this new digital world. So we were talking about, you know, how do we really amplify the process made on digital so far to drive the future digital hiring landscape. And we're always speaking to our subcommittee members, we're always getting feedback from testing our plans, proposals, and the changes we're making. So whether it's work around things like a social media framework when checking social media profiles of candidates, whether it's referencing or qualifications, we're always working hard with our subcommittees all the time to improve the proposals we're making. So our next Better Hiring Toolkit is in financial services coming out next month. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll have several other industries to follow, including local authority, education and health. So that's a little bit about what's happening over the next quarter or so and some of the work that we're doing. Just to conclude now, a little bit about how we're always on the lookout for new members of the subcommittee. So it's completely free to join. Subcommittees meet every 6 to 8 weeks, generally 7 weeks, for 1 hour virtually. And we wanted to make sure that we were minimizing the time pull on people being a member. So it's not just about attending the subcommittees. It means that you get things like the free monthly updates or on different hiring changes that are happening, on campaigns that we're running, changes and developments, latest news. And we meet with the subcommittees to really keep them updated on projects and also provide updates and insights to things to come. The best thing that I think happens in the subcommittee meetings is that organisations come together with their peers and talk to each other about what challenges they're facing with hiring within their sectors. So a call to action today, if I could be so cheeky, if you want to help influence faster, fairer and safer hiring processes, please do get in touch. It's really easy online. You can join on the website, complete the contact us form or the join us form. And now I will hand back to Karen for any questions there might be.
Corinne, I just wanted to say a massive thank you from Shropshire Partners in Care. That was really inspiring. And a couple of key things I've really taken away. Obviously, you know, I'm a big fan, as is Shropshire Partners in Care, of the toolkit. But one of the things that you said was references are part of your safeguarding commitment. And we would completely agree with that statement. And I think everything that everyone said so far today points in that direction. And to develop a culture of curiosity, to record information, to share it. And I think, you know, in safeguarding, we talk a lot about using our professional curiosity. It was mentioned by our speaker earlier on, and I think it's absolutely critical. So on behalf of us, thank you. Incredibly inspiring session this morning. So thanks, Corinne. And I'm just going to now